On today's show, we update the Calder race by talking about Connor Bedard being back on track, some updates on Marco Rossi, some defensemen as well with Brock Faber and Nemec, and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be updating the Calder race and seeing who's in the forefront of that. We'll start off with Connor Bedard being back on track after his injury and continuing to dominate and do some great things at the NHL level. We'll talk about his game in detail, what's been good. We'll also talk about Marco Rossi in our first segment and kind of review his kind of up and down season. It's been all over the lineup in Minnesota. We'll kind of look at what's going on that side. In our second segment, we'll focus on some defensemen. We'll focus on Brock Faber still killing it. And also Simon Nemec. His game has changed recently. We'll talk about how the coaching change has a lot to play in that. And then in our final segment, we'll look at the Columbus Blue Jackets Russian line, Dmitri Voronkov, Yegor Chinakhov, and Kirill Marchenko. We'll look at that kind of combination of skills and what's going on in Columbus as well. But before getting to that, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers. It would help out a lot if you just hit that button. It takes a second of your time. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day and leave us a rate and review if you have the time. So let's get things started here with Connor Bedard being back on track. Talk me through the points since his return from injury, and also what's going on overall with Connor Bedard in Chicago after they traded a couple pieces as well, right? So he's even more isolated, right?
He is indeed. They lost Anthony Beauvillier for fifth round draft pick to, was it Nashville, I think? And that's one of the only proven goal scorers, proven goal scorers on that Chicago lineup, but has not stopped Connor Bedard from putting up points. He has 13 points in his 12 games since returning from injury, where he's logged 5 goals, as well as 8 assists, which is not bad at all. He's been playing some really solid hockey and doing it very much on his own. Still playing like the exceptional brand of dynamic hockey that we're used to seeing from him. The handling skill is still like just ridiculous. He's constantly creating space for himself, and it was one of the only players on that Chicago team that it has been able to consistently access space in the offensive zone. Like, the offensive system has been a little bit painful to watch at times in Chicago this season and is helping their tanking efforts most certainly. But Connor Bedard has been the big exception to that rule. He's been the one player just consistently driving the bus offensively. And he's a very good player. So shock for us that we never saw coming. Totally never expected after last season, where we scouted him for a full year. And I think very little has changed with his projections since being drafted. He's been exactly what I think that we were expecting him to be this season in terms of pushing the pace offensively, showing a couple growing pains in the defensive zone, and struggling a little bit in terms of being surrounded. But the individual brilliance has been more than enough to put up points on a pretty consistent basis.
For sure. I think that the main standout for me with Connor Bedard is just, we all knew heading into the season how good his shot was, how competent he was at blending his skills to create goal scoring opportunities. But the adaptability's just been next level with Bedard. I mean, he's adapting so well to offensive scenarios. He's not the type of player who consistently does the same thing on every shift. He's always switching things up. He'll alternate between kind of slowing down, driving the middle, or just, overwhelming defensemen wide, stick handling through them, stick handling across them. There's so much versatility and adaptability in his ability to create offense. And I think that's the main thing that's made him such an effective NHLer. Overall, I think that when you think of Connor Bedard, you think of that curl and drag wrister, and, he's definitely up there with the best already in this league. But it's just, for me, he doesn't have to rely on that to create goal scoring opportunities for himself. He's not just, the type of player who's going to park himself at the half wall and just spam shots. He's so good at cutting inside of players, catching defensemen on their heels, kind of fooling them by making them think he's going to shoot on one side and then kind of, dragging the puck across his body and shooting the other. There's so much versatility in his goal scoring arsenal. And I thought he would adapt fairly well to the NHL. I didn't think he'd adapt this well. The defensive game obviously is still an issue, but you don't want to nitpick at Connor Bedard's game. He's going to be a fantastic NHLer for years to come, and I think his it's his Calder trophy to lose. I think there's not much he can do from here until the end of the season that'll make him fall out of first place. Do you see anyone else kind of overtaking him in any way, or is it really Bedard's trophy?
The only contender here in my book is Brock Faber, and I do think that it is a contention with Brock Faber averaging over 25 minutes a night, and we'll really delve into just why we are so enamored with his play this season in the next segment, or we'll do a deep dive. But I do think it's a bit of a two-horse race between those two players. Bedard obviously has the advantage being the most recent first overall draft pick, having just the game-breaking skill. But I think that Brock Faber has brought just as much on ice value to his team as Connor Bedard has this season. And again, this season, in terms of long-term projection, I'm not going to make any arguments here, Brock Faber over Connor Bedard, but this season he's been very, very good. But yeah, I think that at least among the forward prospects, there's a pretty wide gap between 1 and 2 here in the Calder race, with Bedard very, very, very much taking that lead. But Marco Rossi has been just a real feel-good story this season, and I know he's one of both of our favorites from that 2021 NHL draft, 2020 NHL draft class, and where from the style he was playing to the production he was putting up with the Ottawa 67s, very, very, very impressive draft year season. And obviously COVID derailed his development afterwards, and lucky enough to still be playing hockey today, let alone in the NHL. And so it's been just wonderful to see him playing pretty not consistent top 6 minutes, but he's consistently getting shots inside the top 6. He's been oscillating between the first line and the fourth line all season long. If you're looking at his game logs, there's a ton of games where he's played 20 minutes, a ton of games where he's played 11. A lot of that movement in that lineup, but it's his versatility that's allowed him to be so versatile when he's been in scoring droughts like the one that he's in right now. I mean, he has not scored a single point in his last 9 games, but despite that, he's still been able to be impactful and is still playing 17, 18 minutes a night on like half of his games. So there's clearly a lot of trust built up in the coaching staff of being able to trust that when he's on the ice, whether he's producing or not, he's going to be doing something. He's going to be applying a lot of defensive pressure, a lot of forechecking pressure, working very hard off puck, creating space for his line mates, consistently using his line mates and trying to build attacks together as a unit overall, rather than going on solo missions in the offensive zone. And I think that his development is finally back on course. And while 17 goals and 33 points through 65 games is not like superstar level production just yet, as an NHL rookie, I think it is more than respectable. And I'm very excited to see what he's going to be able to do in that Minnesota Wild lineup in the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, because I think that he's going to be a tremendously entertaining and fun and wonderful storyline to see in Minnesota's top 6 long term.
For sure. I think the thing that stands out for me with Rossi is, like you mentioned, the versatility, but it's also he's really focused down on the strengths that made him so good in his draft year.
Hugely.
He's doubled down on the things that really made us both enamored with what Marco Rossi can bring to the game. He's not necessarily the highest end skater, but that's definitely improved over the past years. But he's combined that with his pre-existing motor. His motor is one of the best in his draft class, and he's doubled down on that. He's doubled down on his playmaking ability. He's, trusting his shot a lot more as well. It's still a work in progress, and there are going to be droughts like the ones he is in right now. But the fact that he's still in the NHL's roster for the Minnesota Wild right now is a testament to how he impacts a game in more ways than just his ability, his pure skill. Because he's got the skill to be, for me, a point per game NHLer still. But, when he's not impacting the game through the score sheet, he's still doing fantastic things through the Wild, and that's what really stands out. But that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get into some defensemen that are in the Calder race in our second segment, talk about Brock Faber and Szymon Nemec mainly. We'll talk about how Brock Faber's turned this game into an NHL caliber one, and focus on how Szymon Nemec's current recent struggles are perhaps a result of this coaching change that happened in New Jersey. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors at Ibotta.
Grocery bills are so expensive these days, but now they don't have to be. Start getting cash back on your grocery shopping with the free Ibotta app and and get cash back every single time that you shop. Ibotta is a free app that gives you the most cash back every time that you shop on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies to toys. So you can make sure that you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. The average Ibotta user saves $256 every single year, which is at least one big grocery trip. So make sure that you can start saving money on all of your errands. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKEDONNHL when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play and download the free Ibotta app to start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONNHL. That is IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONNHL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking about two defensemen that have separated themselves from the pack, in our opinions, in terms of the upper end of this Calder race. You know, Luke Hughes is also in the talks, but we've covered him fairly well over the year. I think it's good that we're focusing on Brock Faber and Szymon Nemec this time around. Let's start off with Faber. I think that no one really saw this coming. I don't think anyone saw Brock Faber becoming a number one NHL defenseman in his draft year. That is just absurdity. 25, he's averaging over 25 minutes a night right now in Minnesota and doing fantastic stuff with that. In terms of point totals, he is at 37 points in 65 games on the season. Again, as a defenseman playing 25 minutes a night, top power play minutes, top penalty killing minutes, top 5-on-5 minutes. He's doing it all for Minnesota, right?
He is indeed. It's been lovely to see. Like I remember being quite a big fan of Brock Faber in his draft year, and I did not see this level of progression. I think like the only like public scout I can think of that would have conceptualized of this type of meteoric rise is Cam Robinson, who's been like pounding the Brock Faber drum for years at this point. But he's always just been this highly intelligent two-way presence who uses his skating and like lower center of gravity to consistently win inside position and out leverage opponents. And that positional intelligence was really the foundation of his game. And I think I may have envisioned him to become like a solid second pairing piece, putting up really good analytics, just very, very possession oriented and composed and intelligent in the way that he approached the game. But a top pairing role with high end penalty kill and power play minutes and this level of production and just overall, he's been looking like a 30-year-old NHLer this entire season. And I mean that in like how he approaches the game mentally. Like the level of composure has just been off the charts this season. And whenever he's made a mistake, he's been immediately learning from it and integrating those lessons into the way that he approaches the play. So he's been learning very, very quickly. And it's been a great discovery for Minnesota. Just an excellent get in that Kevin Fiala trade to nab Brock Faber from a Los Angeles team that already had a lot of defensive prospects. And I guess Faber was deemed surplus to requirements, and he's now proven that he should not have been. So very, very good season.
Yeah, for sure. I think I remember for sure, you know, I'd hopped on as a guest on a podcast. I don't remember which one, but I hopped on a podcast as a guest to break down the Kevin Fiala trade. And when I was asked about Brock Faber, what really stood out to me, you know, in his draft year and the years after that, was that Brock Faber was a player who doesn't defend physically. He defends with a stick first and foremost. He's able to gain inside position, like you said. He's able to leverage his weight and win physical battles with technique rather than brute strength. And I think that's continued at the NHL level. He's still a stick first defenseman, but those have so much more value today than they had even 5-6 years ago. I think that's the main standout, right? Is that the NHL defending game has changed. Teams have realized that average sized or undersized defensemen that, you know, grow up having played against players that are bigger than them have to develop these tools and actually end up being more efficient in terms of pure output when it comes to defending the rush, when it comes to retrieving pucks and playing them out, and when it comes to defending in zone. And Brock Faber is a perfect example of that. And yeah, he's outgrown the progression I predicted from him tenfold. I thought he would be a number 4, number 5, you know, two-way defenseman who can do a bit of everything but doesn't excel in anything, and now he's excelling in pretty much everything. So it's like it's a big gap between what I thought of him and what he's become. But moving on to Szymon Nemec, a prospect that I was a big fan of the entire year, and we had a long debate against each other regarding David Jiricek versus Szymon Nemec. so far Nemec has the upper hand. We'll see what time will give regarding Jiricek. He was always going to have a bit of a longer progression than Nemec, mainly because Nemec is a defenseman who, like, all of his tools are uplifted by his intelligence, whereas with Jiricek, he has more tools, more meat to the bone, but there's still the mental game to figure out. But to focus on Nemec, really, there's been a big difference in the last couple of games because of the recent coaching change in New Jersey. So under Lindy Ruff, what was really standing out in New Jersey is that they constantly encourage their defensemen to activate. And Nemec thrives in that environment. That's exactly what he needs and what benefits his game. Nemec is at his best when he's joining rushes as a fourth man, when he's activating inside the offensive zone and finding that space. That was my big qualm, I think, with Nemec's game in his draft year, is that he seemed kind of magnetically glued to the blue line.
Yeah.
And as we've seen him this year, I think it was really a coaching thing rather than a stylistic thing with Nemec. And when he was invited and encouraged to leave his blue line in the offensive zone and kind of just dart inside the offensive zone, go below the dots, make plays in pressure, in tight areas, we saw Simon Nemec really that came out of his shell. Whereas now we're going back in New Jersey to that kind of defensemen do their job, forwards do their job type of style. And it's kind of harmed Nemec's game a bit, right?
Yeah, fully agree. Like, I definitely think that, like, in his draft year, one of the big detractors for me in how I ranked him, and I ranked him 10th overall in that draft year, one spot, like, he was sandwiched between, I think, like, Mintyukov and Lane Hudson, which was quite a back-to-back-to-back in my rankings. But what kind of held Nemec back, in my view, was very much the passivity in the offensive zone. Like, he was glued to the blue line and often seemed a little bit lost as to what to do when he had space to work with in the offensive zone. But as you mentioned, like, the progression since his draft year on that front has been really, really great to see. And hopefully he'll also be able to clear this new hurdle of the coaching change in New Jersey, because what I've seen of Nemec this season has been by far the best hockey I've ever watched of him. So he's really been integrating a ton of different styles into his game. He's learning to be a lot more confident on puck. He's trying things. He's trying to test his handling skill. He's making mistakes, but by doing so, he's testing what he's actually able to do, which is a really, really big plus for him, because I was always a little bit concerned that he was a bit too passive, a little bit too eager to make the simple, easy, smart play at all times, that maybe held him back a little bit from being able to break games open. And there have been some flashes of that this season, which has been very, very promising. But yeah, as you mentioned, the most recent games I have watched of Nemec have been a little bit more concerning since the coaching change. But as you mentioned, it's a young player, and young players are always going to be affected the most by these coaching changes. Veterans are used to having those wrenches thrown into the equation and having to adjust. And with Nemec, he'll have to take it in stride. But I'm very curious to see how his development continues there in New Jersey, because it has really been starting to take an upward curve in the last little while.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned young players being affected by coaching the most. I think that's true on two elements, both on the personal level, because it's a big change and you're already going through such a big change being in the NHL, especially as a European grown prospect. You don't know the land too well, that kind of thing. But it's also on the tactical level. Younger players haven't experienced as many different tactics in their career as veterans. So it's a difficult adaptation, but I think that Nemec is smart enough to get over this hurdle and move past it in a good way for his career. I don't think it's really going to be a long-term issue for him. But that wraps things up for our second segment. Now we'll get into our third segment where we talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets Russian connection line. We'll talk about Dmitri Voronkov, Kirill Marchenko, and Yegor Chinakhov. Did I say Chernikov? And Yegor Chinakhov after these messages from our sponsors over at Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. So get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees applies. And now for some legal information. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of the first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA is available to U.S. customers in good standing, and Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Alrighty, so closing things off with our final segment on the Columbus Blue Jackets Russian connection line, and there has been some drama on that side over in Columbus there. So we'll get things started here with Dmitri Voronkov, who's currently the highest producing one of the three. He's got 31 points in 58 games. He's been playing at center on that line. The face-off percentage isn't great, but listen, he's taking face-offs in Columbus. That's just a part of the job. So what's been standing out in his game for you recently, and what's made him currently the tied fifth highest scoring prospect among rookies in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, very, very interesting player. And I think one of the things that's allowed that entire line to tick is that they all approach the game in a fairly similar way. They all want to keep their puck touches quite short in the offensive zone. They all have pretty soft handling skill, and they all have wicked releases, and they don't need much room at all to get them off. So Voronkov has been very much thriving in that environment with other players that approach the game in that way, and he's been really allowed to play his game, which is very much centered around quick puck touches, getting towards like the middle of the slot, banging away at pucks. He's massive. I mean, he's like what, 6'5", 240 pounds. Like, this is an absolute unit of a player, and he loves to get into those areas. Like, I haven't seen him too much, or like right at the net front, but he loves his flybys. So in terms of like timing a flyby with a shot from the point, and really using his size to be a massive wrench into defensive structures, and just making it really annoying for defenses to keep eyes on the puck and so on. But I've been a fan of quite a few facets of his game. Like, obviously the goal scoring has been the big standout. He's been scoring on a ton of his shots, and it's because there's a ton of velocity behind it, and he's been able to get a ridiculous amount of power off of releases from like really, like, when it's off balance, when it seems like it's just going to be a little floater on net, it ends up being a really hard low shot that might be a goaltender 5-hole or something from the mid slot. So the way that he's been able to get his release off through traffic with his massively long stick has been pretty impressive in my viewing so far.
Yeah, for sure. And, there's obviously going to be some regression there because the shooting percentage is at 15.4%. And
Exactly.
for a rookie, that's pretty high. But I could see him settle around the 20 goal mark in his prime. I think that he's got the offensive tools for that. What really stands out for me with Voronkov in the games that I've watched is the combination of size and spatial awareness. You don't really see that often. Mostly big guys aren't too aware of what's going on around them. But I love the way he spaces himself, the way he keeps kind of a map of, where his opponents are and how to kind of maximize the space and time that he has in the offensive zone. And that's a really important tool for the NHL. Also, sure. We could talk about Yegor Chinakhov as well. He's been having a decent season, nothing overwhelming on that side, but, he's been scoring goals, producing points, and doing fairly well. And this was a player that I remember him getting picked in his draft +1, as a 19-year-old getting picked in the first round, and when he called
21st overall,
when Jarmo kicked the line and called his name, it was the funniest thing because like even Craig Button was like, "Who?" It was a big scramble. But I remember having heard small rumblings of him in his draft year, and I mean he's a player who completely. I mean, he dogged the NHL, like full on, just dominated that league, which isn't a tough thing to do, but it was really clear that this was a player who was already physically mature and capable of just rifling the puck relentlessly into the back of the net, right?
Exactly. No, 100%. I mean, it's kind of funny looking back because in his draft year, he put up 17 points in no 16 points in 37 MHL games, which is not the production that gets you drafted. So it's quite understandable why he got passed over the first time around. But his progression since his D+1 season has been very impressive. And again, it's an entire line of players who are more capable goal scorers than they are like creators on the ice. They all three of these Russians have about like 2 or 3 more goals than they have assists. I believe all 3 are currently on 17 goals in the season. There's a lot of symmetry on that line. And what has been very fun is that this has been a line that has just very consistently, when they've been all together, but also like when you've only had like 2 or so of the players matched up, they've been consistently overperforming on their expected goals for. Like they're just very, very good shooters, and they're consistently putting the puck in the net and overperforming on their PDO. So, like for instance, so far this season, in terms of goals for, one second. Yeah. So as a line this season, they've scored 13 goals and only conceded 8 through 264 minutes of even strength time on ice. And despite that, the expected goals for percentage is around like 46%. So they're not really performing all that great in terms of possession metrics, but the opportunities that they are getting, they are consistently capitalizing on. And this is a very fun thing to have in a middle six line. Not conventional at all. And like I can little bit, a part of me can understand why they're getting benched by their coach in recent games, because it is MHL style hockey. It is wide open. They're allowing chances against, but when they create chances in the offensive zone, when they have a couple of feet to work with in the middle of the slot, there's a very high chance that any of the 3 of them is going to put the puck in the back of the net. And I've watched a couple games with that line playing together, and it's been entertaining to the max every single time. So I can very much understand why it's a fan favorite and a coach's hair pulling line, you know?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's the thing that really stands out to me is this is just it's chaotic hockey, and it's fun and it's entertaining from an outside perspective, but coaches have to hate that. It's their job to hate that. So like it's
They're
part of
paid
the
like that.
yeah, they're paid to hate that. That's the thing. But it's part of the job description. You do whatever it takes to win, but Columbus is a team that regardless is going to end up in kind of that bottom 4 slot for in the NHL and be in contention for a lottery pick. So like for me it's just, do you lean into that? Do you have the fun that you can have in the meantime before your big picks join in? And I
Yes. Yeah, the
yeah,
answer is yes, Hattie. Like if you're tanking, you
absolutely.
gotta have fun doing it. And this is a fun
Exactly.
line.
Of course, and you got to get Adam Fantilli some friends, which is why we're really looking forward to seeing what happens on draft day. Because if Macklin Celebrity ends up in Columbus, that's going to be a fantastic 1-2 punch of centers for the next how many years. But that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Odyssey, wherever you're listening to this. Make us your first listen of the day and leave us a rating and review. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next episode as we cover some more prospects content during the month of March. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High, and we hope you tune in next time.